Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this web series. My name is Nick Strobelt with Avalon Wealth. Because of the events over the last several months, some of my clients have asked some questions about their estate planning, wondering if now is a good time to get their estate planning done, and really diving into the whys behind estate planning. And so with that in mind, I thought it might be a good idea to bring my good friend and estate planning attorney, Taylor Waite, on today's video to dive into estate planning a little bit more thoroughly, to understand the whys and the do's and don'ts behind estate planning that might be helpful and valuable for you. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. All right, Taylor, thank you for joining me on the web series today. I'm glad you were able to make it.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at this communication we have going on, and I remember about 5 or 6 years ago when we first met, I think I was running on a trail, and I saw you running on a trail as well early in the morning, and I thought, hey, this guy's, that's pretty cool. This guy's a fit guy.
I think I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm really glad to have you on. Taylor is very unique. He works at Clear Counsel Law Group, and as an estate planning attorney as well as a probate attorney. And over the last several years, he's worked with a lot of my clients, helping them get their estate planning done from nothing to a complete estate plan. And I'm really excited because Taylor's also my estate planning attorney. I've used him personally for my own stuff, and he's done a great job. And so I'm just really grateful and excited to have you on the show. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's interesting when I think of a lot of my clients that are considering estate planning or those that haven't quite done it yet, I find that a lot of them fit into one of two categories. The first category is like, hey, you know what? It's going to happen sometime down the road. I know I need to get this estate planning done, but let's just procrastinate a few more years. We got plenty of time. We're still young. Or even they might say, hey, you know what? My kids can fight over my money when I die. It's not a big deal. That's one category. The second category of people are the ones that are saying, hey, let's get this done. I don't want my kids to fight. I want them to know our intentions down the road if something happens to us. So there's really a wide array of people out there and their level of proactiveness. I guess my question for you is, when you meet with people, what motivation or what primarily motivates them to see you, have you noticed?
I think what I've noticed is you see that they want to talk about their estate planning when things change in their lives. And this can be a variety of changes. Sometimes people come to us after they've had to go through probate for a mom or a sibling or something like that. And the process can be lengthy and expensive. Sometimes that process is a purchase of a new home, or they move to a new state, or things like that. Sometimes it's retirement. They retire, and hopefully, we have people who are talking to them, they recognize that estate planning has to be done while you have capacity. As soon as someone loses the ability to make the decisions for themselves, the ability to choose how you want your assets to be distributed is gone.
That's a good point. I think it's very motivating when an illness happens or an accident happens. Hey, it's time to get it done, but it's often too late at that point.
Absolutely. We've seen an increase in interest in estate planning with the current pandemic as well for that reason, because there is a lot of uncertainty. People don't know what's going to happen, so they want things in place. And so really that is the primary motivating factor, is changes. So again, they buy a new home, they move to a new state, they retire. Something happens with a child or a parent or a sibling, and they think, I really need to do this for myself. So hopefully we can prompt people to do it before it becomes a problem, and those things are in place. Because as you said, really primarily what parents are buying is peace of mind for themselves, that when they go, that everything will go smooth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I just want to get it out of the way. If someone came to you and said, hey, I don't have any estate planning done, I don't have any of that work done, what does a full estate plan entail? Just so we can check those pieces off as to what someone receives.
Great. That's a great question, Nick. Actually, oftentimes I describe a good estate plan to have two pieces. There's the piece, if you think of, we often use the proverbial bus. If someone gets hit by a bus, they could die. That's a possibility. They could also become incapacitated while still being alive. And addressing both of those situations is ideal for any estate plan. So the full trust package, if that's what you're talking about, it includes the trust document itself, includes a pour-over will, which captures anything you may forget about or get later. And that's sort of that scenario where you've been hit by that bus and you die. And so the trust and the will and things like that will address the situation of what comes after you die. But the trust package also includes the full set of power of attorney documents. So that's healthcare power of attorney, including those directives regarding end of life, financial power of attorney. And again, those would cover that situation where you're hit by that unfortunate bus and you survive but are incapacitated. So the full package, again, the trust, the will, power of attorney documents, all together in that full trust package to get a whole estate plan.
So just run by me. In this scenario, someone didn't have healthcare directives in place and they did get hit by that bus. There's immediate decisions that need to be made regarding their life. Assuming they're not married, or who makes those decisions in that scenario if they don't have that done?
If the power of attorney documents aren't in place in the state of Nevada, your only option is guardianship. Is to go to court and be formally appointed as the legal guardian for that individual to be able to make decisions, either finance or healthcare. And that is an expensive and an intrusive proposition to go to court and be appointed as the guardian. Because then at that point, those funds that you thought were going to be used to bless the lives of those you leave behind are now going to be used to pay for a guardianship attorney to help in the process, and things like that. So really they have to be done before anything like that happens.
Right. And the scenario that flashed in my mind is someone got hit by that bus and the decision to keep them on life support or not, some of those things I can imagine can't wait for a week or two or a month for a court to get involved to decide who makes that decision. So it's vitally, it seems a must for peace of mind for anyone, it seems like.
Absolutely. Because again, if you have an estate anyway, we know that healthcare is expensive and to keep a body alive is very expensive. It's a little morbid to talk about it, but those life support machines, someone's going to pay for it. Insurance is going to pay for it. If it doesn't, then the individual's estate is going to pay for it.
Right.
You have those directives. This is what I want. I don't want to be on the machines. It's time for me to go. And you've got to have all that in place.
Yeah, and we probably dove a little bit into the weeds there on one scenario.
But it still is a very important part of the estate plan. It really is.
Yeah. And I agree. But pulling back to kind of a 30,000-foot level of the estate plan as a whole, a lot of my clients, I very much encourage them to get something like this done, because the last thing you want is your children or anyone to try to guess what your intentions were. And having this done properly, your intentions are known legally and can be fulfilled after you pass away. And so it's just a great scenario to be in. But Taylor, I want to talk a moment about funding your trust.
Okay.
Because I think I see a lot of people that create a trust and they have all the paperwork done. They spent money to get it established. But there's a final step that sometimes a lot of attorneys may not do for the client, and they say, hey, you need to do this last part, which is funding the trust. I want to get your perspective on really how important it is to fund your trust and what happens if they don't.
Okay. So the trust funding itself, frankly, is the most essential piece of the estate planning process. Because an unfunded trust, frankly, in the end can become worthless. So you spend the time and the money to do it, and if not properly funded, it either will do one of two things. If the proper documents aren't in place to draw things back into the trust, then it truly is worthless. But an unfunded trust as well, let's say you create the trust, you have a home or bank accounts and never attach those to the trust or transfer them to the trust. One of the primary purposes of a trust is to avoid probate. And if you fail to fund, then you get to go to probate to fund the trust after you die.
So backing up, funding the trust, so we define that. So someone has a brokerage account, they have a home. Funding a trust is actually putting the home in the name of the trust, or making the brokerage account in the name of the trust, or making the beneficiary the name of the trust, is what we're defining as funding the trust here.
That's right. The way oftentimes we like to think is just as a kind of an object lesson to help people understand is think of the trust like you're creating a box, right? So if you create this beautiful box but never put anything in that box, then I mean it's good to look at, but doesn't serve its purpose to hold those items. So again, there are two ways really. When we say fund the trust, you pointed them out exactly right. Either we're going to take something like a piece of real property and actually put that inside that box, that trust box. We'll title it in the name of the trust. Some bank accounts you may put in the name of the trust. Sometimes for a variety of reasons, you may simply add the trust as a beneficiary. And then we always suggest, frankly, if you're talking about 401ks without getting into the detail of all the retirement type of accounts, with respect to how you attach retirement type accounts to a trust, we always refer people to their financial planners, such as yourself, those that can advise them on potential tax implications related to transferring or connecting that type of account to your trust.
Absolutely. So every account is unique and requires a consideration before attaching them to the trust or not. So that's a very good point. You can't just blanket all of them into the trust. It might not be in your best interest or your beneficiary's best interest.
That's right.
That makes a lot of sense. So just walk us through a moment, Taylor, on let's say someone was unable, had great intentions, they wanted to do their estate planning, but time slipped away from them, life got in the way, and they passed away without being able to do their proper estate planning. So they had a home, let's say they had a few brokerage accounts, just a decent amount of assets, kind of average assets for someone that's worked their whole life. Walk us through what happens, the probate process, and really the cost of probate, and who the burden lies upon on who has to manage that probate process among the beneficiaries.
Okay. So if there's no estate planning in place, it's important to note that in Nevada, and most states have this, they have statutes that will dictate how your assets are distributed. And it's going to go how you would expect. It'll first go to surviving spouse. If not that, then the children. If not children, then siblings. I mean, you can maybe guess at how those will go. But the probate process itself, at least in Nevada, if real property is involved of any nature, of any value, if it's a deeded piece of real property, you have to go to probate. And probate in Nevada is driven primarily by the value at that point. So there are kind of three levels, and we won't get into the specifics other than you have to understand that the net value of the estate is what will drive the process. So the timing can be fairly quick, 4 to 6, 8 weeks. If you're on the lower end, anything under 100,000, that's everything. Or if you're over 300,000, honestly, it can take 10, 12 months, 2 years, depending on the complexities of the case. And in that same spectrum, you may pay as little as $2,500 to $3,000, or you could pay upwards of, if you're right around 300, 400,000 in value, you're going to pay $10,000 to $15,000 for probate, or up from there on the buy. Yeah, it's difficult, and the individual that's going to bear that responsibility will be, if it's a surviving spouse, they'll have to step up and take responsibility. It could be a child or a sibling. With everything else going on, it is a difficult burden to pass on, to say, hey, I'm gone, I'm not here to help, but now you're going to have to deal with this. I mean, we do a lot of probate work. We try to make it as simple and efficient as possible, but it simply takes time. You have to get all the information in place, make sure the court has everything it needs, and then just walk through the process. Certain benchmarks are met as far as timing and notices. And so it can be an expensive and a lengthy process.
And I would have to agree with you. I've seen people that have come to my office that are managing a probate process and trying to, their parents have passed away and they're managing that. And it's a burden to carry for them. And compare that with someone that had their proper estate planning done, and watching the transition of wealth from that generation to them. It's night and day, the easiness and the difference of that process.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, thank you. So I'm curious to know, I know a lot of people have been proactive over the years and they've gotten trusts over the last few decades. What if someone had a trust that was 15, 20 years old? Really, is that good enough? Or is there any maintenance involved for old trusts that they established many years ago?
Maintenance really is really is essential. I would say that the bigger thing with the older trusts, some of the older trusts that are 15 or 20 years old have mandatory what are called AB provisions. They're called AB trusts, usually the marital in the marital setting. And the reason that's relevant is it actually goes to the estate tax imposed by the federal government. Some states have estate tax. Nevada does not. In any event, the old AB trusts, if written as a mandatory provision in the trust, then generally what it does is it dictates that what's called the exemption trust be funded first, all the way up to the current tax exemption. The reason that's a problem is because the current tax exemption for an individual is $11.4 million, which is most people. So 15, 20 years ago, it was still high. It was, and I'm going to guess, I want to say it was $600,000 or $800,000. And today it's 11. So when those AB trusts were very popular, it made more sense. You wanted to push as much money as you could into an exemption trust, which would then bring the estate under the estate tax level, so save the estate money. That was its driving purpose, and it was very important. But as that limit grew and grew and grew to where we are today, 11.5 million, and our office, we do a lot of probate work, and we've seen that issue where the courts have said, no, I'm sorry, this is a mandatory provision. So all the assets must, because it's not discretionary, all those assets have to be shifted to the exemption trust when that first spouse dies. And maybe that works for what they're doing. It's still generally going to be for the benefit of the surviving spouse. But it does, what we have to understand is usually the exemption trust is an irrevocable trust, which presents a few problems for like a surviving spouse because it can put limitations on how the income of the trust is distributed to the beneficiary, how the principal can be accessed, and can frankly eliminate the surviving spouse's ability to amend or change the trust if they need to. So again, it is going to be situation specific, but that's the primary issue we see with the big ones, is that mandatory split language. The language is important because hopefully you have more than $11 million, right? Mm-hmm. So the exemption is relevant to you, but if it's not, then you want, as a survivor, you want the ability to say, no, I don't need that trust, that exemption trust, I'm not going to. Sorry, a little long-winded response, but maintenance really is important to make sure it says what you want and to account for the current legal climate as well.
Yeah, and I think you hit the point very well. Maintenance. People just in the course of time, they sell homes, they buy a new home, they open new accounts, they change accounts.
Right.
The child that you loved isn't the child you love anymore as much, and you want it to go to someone else. Or maybe special needs arise where you have someone that doesn't quite have the ability to manage your assets on their own for health concerns, whatever. So there's special needs. So all those things are vitally important to keep up to date, so that your intentions are brought to fruition after passing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good. So I want to ask you, Taylor, kind of, you are very experienced in this field, and I greatly trust your advice. When you go about helping people on a daily basis with their estate planning, what are the top 3 mistakes that you see people doing that really could be fixed if they just had a bit more advice or knew what to do?
I think in the context of if we look at the trusts themselves, oftentimes it can simply be a mistake to not do a trust or not address the estate planning at all. But then the biggest problems we run into is people not properly funding their trusts. And we've talked about that and the issues that can solve, the issues that can cause. And it flows into, again, just what you just said, the not updating a trust for a variety of reasons. Frankly, one of the big selling points on trusts is that to some degree, you can control the distribution to your children, whether that's certain distributions not occurring until a certain age or not occurring until certain things take place. But a big reason oftentimes is, as you said, if you have children that maybe they're bad with money, maybe they have drug problems, or maybe there are mental or other physical impairments, because frankly, you can run into the issue where if there is no estate planning set up, you could have a child that is qualifying for certain programs or assistance, and you die, and then because no estate planning is in place, there is a flood of money that then will disqualify them for those programs and things like that because there's enough money in there. But sorry, back to your question. The biggest mistakes are going to be things really like not properly funding a trust, not updating a trust. The other thing we see is there are a lot of options online for simple trusts to just jump online and do them, and they can work. But for the reasons we're talking about, it really is very important because it's going to be very specific to the individual. And hopefully I'm not
You're talking about just you're going online and it says, hey, trust, we can do it for a small cost, and you have all your trust documents.
That's right.
Okay.
And my issue with those, because they can, if someone's going to go on and do it, it can be helpful. But really, as an estate plan, a good estate plan is going to be specific to the individual, because a trust, frankly, is not going to be the answer for absolutely everyone. Sometimes it's going to be a little outside of their price range, because your trusts, a pretty standard trust for an individual is going to run you $1,500 to $2,000.
Okay.
On the marital end, $2,500 to as much as $3,000. So sometimes it pushes it outside of what people want to pay. But again, the online issue is they don't address your specific needs. Because if you're just talking about the ability to transfer wealth, there are many ways you can do it. Pay on death beneficiary designations. You can do that even with real property, with vehicles in Nevada. They have a provision to do that. I mean, so it's important that you sit down with someone who's done it so we can walk you through what will be best for you, but also, frankly, what you can afford at the time. And then the other issue, and we kind of touched on those throughout, is those online trusts are not always going to give you any instructions regarding funding your trust. Mm. Or if they're missing things, you say unfunded, and I'm sorry to be long-winded, but for example, if you go on there, you create a trust, and all you have is the trust document itself, nothing else, and then you never give anything to that trust or attach anything to the trust, when you die, it's worth the paper it's printed on. Really,
and the fee to build it, that $1,500.
That's it.
Yeah.
So it really is very important that just the importance of a good estate planning attorney is that they can direct you what would be best in your situation, and always, again, in concert with a good financial planner, a good advisor like yourself, to make sure you're taking the best advantage of just tax situations and things like that.
Right. It really takes a team to manage someone, estate planning attorney, advisor, a good accountant, CPA, right. Really a trio of advice to make sure to navigate the financial world, which is extremely important to make sure you're protected on all aspects of your money. Now that's really helpful. And I couldn't help but think, but you mentioned the fee for an estate plan, but without an estate plan, the fee of probate is 4, 5, 6 times as high. And so it's either you paid on the front end for a discount, or it's paid on the back end at a premium.
That's right. I often tell clients, if we're talking about your standard revocable trusts, which is what most people get, I think the best way to think of it is as a gift to your beneficiaries. And it is, and it's a wonderful gift. It gives peace of mind, not just to you, but also to them, to know that when you go, it's going to be hard. So make at least this piece of it as easy as possible.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. I'm trying to think, Taylor, what other advice do you have that maybe I haven't asked about that would be helpful to anyone considering an estate plan, or someone that already has an estate plan, just so that they're really current with the current information available?
I guess I would say 2 things. Number one, if you're listening to this and you have in your bookshelf that trust binder that someone did long ago, dust it off, crack it open, and look at it. Because frankly, you may have identified Uncle Bob as your trustee, and Uncle Bob's been dead for 10 years, right? Mm. Or again, as you've said, you have provisions in there that relate to children that are older, or maybe there's nothing in there for a child that you now have. So that would be, and I know we've talked about that, just hopefully this will cause you to, if you have one, crack it open, take a look at it, see what's there. And if you don't have one, then give us a call. we'd be happy to. Our consults are always free.
Yeah, this is a good time. What's the best way people can get a hold of you to ask you questions and really pick your brain?
So the best way is just to call the office, and that number is 702-476-5900. Right now, we have a little more time on our hands, just meaning we're either quarantined in the office or at home. So email also is a good way to reach us, and you can reach me at Taylor, that's Taylor, at clearcounsel.com.
And I'm assuming you can do virtual meetings and help people that way?
We can do Zoom meetings, we can do telephone meetings.
Good.
We do have the ability to do some in-person signings here at the office. We've set up some plexiglass partitions to make people more comfortable in the conference rooms if we do signings here. So we're doing what we can to address the current need as well.
Very good. Well, Taylor, I've greatly appreciated this conversation, and I always respect and admire your advice, and I think it's extremely helpful. So I appreciate your time today, and yeah, until next time, we'll conclude at this point.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Taylor.